This is Nedra in the Collider Studio, your artist in residence for October. And today we're making some reclaimed Halloween decorations that light up out of basically garbage, refuse even. If you want to make yours exactly like mine, the things that you're going to need are a black plastic bag. It's the high density polyethylene bags that you get anywhere. A gallon container that has a handle built into it. This one's drinking water, but if it's milk, you want to rinse it out. Some string, and then your electronic components. You'll want some LEDs in order to have the thing light up. And whenever you make an LED circuit, you really will often also need a current limiting resistor. We talked about resistors last time. For this application, a 1K or a 1000 ohm resistor is probably ideal for whatever you're going to be building. But we'll also cover different ways where you could get around the need for that later in the video. Some jumper wire, and this is just some garage door opener hookup stuff that I had sitting around. Any old wire of any kind really should be fine because it's super low current. So if you just got something sitting around, you'll be good. For power, I'm going to be using a 9-volt battery. And the 9-volt's really nice because you can basically build it into the project and it'll last on a load like this for many years. I built this cat as a collaborative project with my mom in 2017, and we've left it running for the entire month of October every year since then, and it's still on its original battery. So the battery just being hot glue right in there is not the end of the world. And after 10 years, if you have to replace it, you can just scrape the glue off. But if you are worried about finding a 1K resistor at home, the easy and neat trick that you can use for adding lights to your projects without needing a book of resistors is that a 9-volt battery operates at 9 volts. But these little coin cells, and this is a CR2032, but any of those coin cell batteries of this size operate at 3 volts. And 3 volts is the inherent operating voltage of your LEDs. And since you don't need a resistor to dissipate that excess energy as heat, you can simply just hook the LED up to the battery and it'll glow. You'll get a good 6 to 8 hours out of this, but coin cells are a lot more expensive than 9 volts. And to get only a day out of it for all that extra money versus building your 9-volt in, it really is worth investing in a little booklet of resistors if this is the kind of hobby you're going to want to have at all. But if you just really want something for a little party, just go out and get a coin cell. And then here of note, remember we talked before about how LEDs are diodes and diodes are polarized. That means if you hook this up backwards, it will not light up. So if you apply the LED to your battery one way and it doesn't work, it's not necessarily that your LED is busted. You might just have to hook it up the other way. And I like to, when I make hookups like this, I'll maybe use a clothespin or a little bit of tape. Any number of affixation methods will keep this together for the duration of your event. And like I said, since you only get like 1 day's worth of runtime out of this, it doesn't need to be very permanent. So that's your little tip or trick on your coin cell. Regardless of whether you use a coin cell for this or the 9-volt, all of the tools that you're going to need to use, of course, the soldering iron, and then all the sundries, the supporting bits for the iron, your degoober, your solder itself, a sucker in case you make mistakes, and then other tools that you might need, those diagonal cutters that we looked at before, hot glue, and a hot glue gun. And then the last tool that's here on the bench is like an awl or an ice pick. You'll just need something that you can use to stab holes in the gallon container. It doesn't have to be an awl or an ice pick. Any old nail or screw should also work. And then, of course, a pair of scissors. And this is where we're going to get started. The beginning of this project started for me when I noticed that a gallon container upside down like this and the handle being right here looked kind of like a nose. And so I thought that I could find a bit here that looked like a face to cut out with the scissors. And that bit that looks like a face that I would cut out would be the beginning of the project. So in order to have a good place to start the scissors, I'm going to use the awl and poke a hole. And that's just the place to get started. And then now that I've got my scissors started. I'm cutting out a section of the container. So I think this kind of looks like a face. As with any bit of art, you don't have to make yours exactly like I'm making mine, but you can. But I'm just giving you some inspiration for a way that this could look. After you cut out the base for the face of the design, the next step that I did is to use the awl to poke some eye holes. And I'm gonna put, just like the way the cat has glowing white eyes, today I'm building this face with glowing red eyes. And I think the red is a fun color choice for the holidays. I put my eye holes just kind of like that. And I've only punched one eye hole in this model. At some point you might want to paint this. And I'm not going to do any painting here in the studio, but with the bit that you've cut out and a can of spray paint, you can end up with something that looks kind of like this. The other thing to keep track of is that the more LEDs you install, the more you got to do the soldering later, but then also the faster your battery is going to run down. So if I grab a red LED out of my LED kit, I can push it through the hole that I made with the awl, and it'll kind of stay there just because the awl is about the same size as the LED. And if your whatever nail or screw you use to punch isn't exactly the right size, you just have to wiggle it in there until it gets in there. This plastic's real flexible, so it'll take it real easily. This LED will fall out if you don't give it a little bit better affixation, and that's where the hot glue gun comes in. A liberal puddle of hot glue makes any project better. So something like that, and now you've got that lamp as affixed as it needs to be in my mind, ready to move on to the electrical connections once you've got all of your lights anywhere where you want them. And in order to do that electrical connection, you might need some of this jumper wire. Like I said from before, this is just a wire from like a garage door opener, but anything that you've got at home will be fine. The smaller the wire, the better, because the big stuff is just takes a lot more time to heat up with the iron. And this is solid core stuff, so some wires are stranded. If you do have stranded wire at home, you're going to want to take those strands and twist them together like this before you solder, because a little stray strand will just come to bite you later. If it's solid, you don't have to because it's just one piece of copper in there. So I've got all of my leads twisted together. If you look at an LED, one side is a lead that's longer and the other side has a lead that's shorter. Because you remember they're polarized, you can't hook them up backwards. So I've got all of the long ones twisted together and all the short ones twisted together at each eye. That way I know when I get a wire connected to one spot, I'm connecting that wire to all of the long side, or I'm connecting that wire to all of the short side. If you've got some of them flip-flopped backwards and forwards, some of your lights might light up, but the other ones won't. And then if you put the battery in backwards, then the other ones will light up and the other ones won't. Which might be something that you want if that's the effect you like, but otherwise, if you just want everything to light up together, you got to get everything, the long ones all go together and the short ones all go together. And once you get everything twisted together like that, you can bring the solder to the party. And this is just like from last video where the process is heat comes in, solder goes away, heat goes away. Because if you do it in the wrong order, you get your solder stuck or other bad things might happen. So I look at my tip and I'll say it doesn't need degoobing because we've just been soldering and it's still nice and shiny. So I can bring the heat to the party first, then the solder, take the solder away, take the heat away. And I'm going to do that the same way on all 4 of these connections. That's the long leg and the short leg on both eyeballs. Heat, solder, solder, heat, heat, solder, solder, heat, and the last one. With point-to-point stuff like this, it's really not the end of the world to have way more solder than you need. But as you get into through-hole or surface mount soldering, it's really crucial to only use as much as you need. And so this is a great kind of project to get your foot wet because it's fine to just use a bunch of extra solder. If your joints look all globbed up with giant puddles of solder, you can know that you're using too much. And it'll be fine for this, but when you practice, you can use less later. A good joint is going to look kind of like most of the ones. I'm happy with 3 of these. One of them looks a little bit too big, but it really is you can hardly notice the solder is present. It's just enough to keep them electrically bonded, because the mechanical is already done with the twisting. So after that stage, we need to hook these up to send power through in a circuit. A circuit is going to have to be hooked up in a circle, right? All of the components have to be between the one side of the battery and the other one in order for the electricity to move through it. I'm going to solder some wires to my battery. If you have a battery connector, that's probably better to use, because the manufacturer says that your batteries don't like to get hot. But if you only just barely put the heat on there, just for as long as it takes to get the wire soldered down, the battery doesn't heat up too much, and I won't tell if you won't. I'm checking that the side of the battery that's got the plus on it gets the red wire, because usually the red color means the plus side, the positive side of the circuit. The electricity doesn't care what color the plastic is that's around it, but it's just like a convention that people use to keep track of the circuit. So I'm going to stick with that convention just because it'll help me remember later on. Like, let's say if you're building this for Halloween, right? You might come back to the same project another year from now, and you have to remember what you did. That's why conventions are helpful, you know, because you can always come back to anything that you've built and you say, you know, I use red wires for the hot side, the positive side. And so if I built it and it's got a red wire in it, that's what that red wire is for. And then if it's a convention that everybody else uses, that's even more helpful, because then somebody else can look at it and know what you meant to build, or you can look at somebody else's work and know what they were doing. So now we've got our wires soldered right down to our battery. I was both showing it to you by having it up in the air, but also the shake test lets you know that the mechanical bonding is good, because the wires aren't coming off. If you have a bad solder joint, they'll just snap right apart. And so you can know that you need to do that joint again. Now that this bit is done, we need to insert the current limiting resistor. And this is another thing where the electricity doesn't care where the resistor goes. It's just got to be in there somewhere. But the place that I always put it is on the negative lead. And I don't remember why I started doing that. It's not the kind of convention the way that putting the red wire on the hot side is. That's like a standardized thing that everybody does. The resistor on the negative side is just a me thing. And it could be a you thing too, if you're following this video to the T. I have a whole army of people that do it this way now. At this point, the long leg of one eye needs to be tied to the short leg of the other eye. And it doesn't really matter which one's which. So I'm going to just hook that up with another jumper. And I've cut a piece of wire out from the garage door opener. And I'm going to not use the red side just so that it helps me, because if it's not connected to the plus on the battery, it doesn't get a red wire. Now this is a part where a tool called helping hands might be helpful for you, especially if you're just starting out. Helping hands have got little alligator clips and they sit on the table, and you can clip the work that you're working on into the hands and it holds on to the work for you. That way you've got your hands free to hold on to the iron and to the solder, because juggling the work and the solder and the iron can be a lot to hold on to. It's not the end of the world to melt some solder onto one piece of the work separately and then have solder melted onto another piece of the work already, and then not even really introduce more solder to the party, but just reflow all of the solder that's been there from before. And that reflowing is just heating up both of the pieces of work until the solder is liquid again, and then taking the heat back away from the party. And you can see the bond is fine because it passes the shake test. And so I'm going to tin the one side here and then reflow it again against the LED on the other side. You can only reflow solder a certain number of times, because solder will only reflow if it's got rosin or flux left inside of it. And all of that rosin and flux, you see it burning away whenever we do some soldering. But you get maybe 2 or 3 good works out of it to be able to do some rework. Now at this point, I would hook everything up with my fingers instead of soldering it down and check to see that the lights light up. Because if the lights don't light up, you don't want to learn after you've done all that soldering. And this also will help us test the polarity. Remember, the LEDs are polarized, so if I hook it up one way and it doesn't work, we want to try it the other way. But look at that, I got it right on the first guess. So for good measure, I'm going to hook it up backwards just to show you that backwards will not light up. Nothing happens, but it's not broken, it's just backwards. So then if we hook it up this other way, you can see there's our lights. And it looks fun and cute, right? I will solder the resistor to the side that needs the negative. I'm going to solder the side without the resistor, the plus side of the battery, to the side that needs the plus. And then it'll be lit up until the battery's dead, or until I come through at the end of the month and clip the wire. Tinning the lead. Holding the work together against a piece that's already tinned. And reflowing the solder from both pieces of work together. Take the heat away, and it's still liquid for a while, so you have to hold your hand pretty still, and then you can let go once it resolidifies. And if I do a little tap test again, you can see the lights are lighting up when I've got that connection made. So once I make this connection, it'll just be lit up for the rest of the battery's life. Like I said, until we clip the wires apart. And clipping the wires apart is not like the best on-off switch, you know. If you've got an on-off switch at home, you can certainly install one. But also, like those lever nuts that we talked about earlier, you could use a lever nut as an on-off switch. So now, like, we've got it hooked up and it's working. Let's do a little bit of wire management, make it look pretty. So the first thing I'm going to do is throw some hot glue on the back of the battery and affix the battery to the project, so that way that's not going to go anywhere. Then, since this is all solid core wire, it's going to live wherever it wants to. Stranded stuff likes to flop around, and you might have to hot glue it down too, but the solid core won't. We can install an on-off switch just by snipping any wire anywhere, and when it's broken, there won't be electricity flowing, and then if you wanted to connect them back up, then there would be. So if we strip the installation off and then install one of the connectors, now it's lit up when the connector's installed, and then when you take the connector off, the light goes out, and that's an easy way to keep your battery for the next year. So now all the electronics part of this project is done, and there's a couple of last-minute non-electronic bits that you can do to make it that much more exciting. I've got a lid from the bottle that I prepared earlier with the awl. I poked a hole in the center of the lid and tied a knot in it, and I'm going to pass that through a hole that I'm getting ready to punch in the bottom of the supermarket bag. With the thread threaded through the bottom of the bag, I'm going to then thread it through the opening of the bottle and then screw the lid onto the bottle with the bag captured in between. Now our witch is wearing like a little black dress, a little black plastic dress, and we've got a string that we can hang it from. So if I see if I can't lace this string up through the bottle handle. Yeah, so there it is. There you have it. And the place where you hot glue the battery down, it's the heaviest thing on here, is going to change the way that it's looking, right? So it's looking up in the air right now. If we put that battery somewhere else, you can get it to look down. But it's the kind of thing that you could hang up, outside the house for the trick-or-treaters, or hang it up off of your mantle where the stockings go, or anything. It's a fun little bit, and it was almost exclusively garbage. Just a battery and the LEDs, all the electronic bits, and everything else was just stuff you might have sitting around the house. So if during the Zoom class you'd like to make exactly this, that is nominally the plan. You can collect the materials and you can get this exact thing together I'll be there to answer the questions and guide you through this process. Or if you've got questions about any other electronic making or any other making that, generally, if I know anything about it, I'm happy to talk to you about it. Otherwise, I'll see you there.